What is up, everyone? Today we are going to break down the upcoming UFC Fight Night card from a DraftKings DFS perspective. This week's card being headlined by Yadong versus Henry Cejudo in the bantamweight division. As of right now, we are back to a full 12-fight card. I know it was looking really sketchy there for a second, but they added a few fights, and we have a full 12-fight card. One 5-rounder, that being the main event. And without further ado, we will go fight by fight and break this down. Starting with Modestas Bakauskas versus Rafael Cerquiera. So we'll start off with Bakauskas. Point fighting, light heavyweight, narrow margins type of guy. He's not really going to separate. He's extremely low volume. And in general, he's where fantasy points go to die. I mean, you're seeing, multiple 50-point decision wins. And his best performance is an 84. And even that's not amazing. And now we have him at a $9,300 price tag. Given his style, I think he's an extremely weak play. Now, what's very interesting is when you look at the metrics, it's telling a different story. You see he's minus 120 ITD. That's not bad at 9,300. But yeah, I don't know if that's something I agree with. I think that line is mostly, if not fully, based on Rafael Cerquera's last fight, where he was finished inside of a minute in his UFC debut. So I think a lot of that narrative is flooding into this Bakauskas ITD line. And like I said, I don't know if I agree with that. I think that Bakauskas most likely path to victory, low scoring, boring decision. And then Cerquera on the other side. We don't know much about this guy. Obviously came in and is about as bad as you can do in a UFC debut, getting finished in under a minute. But we don't know much about him. And he's 6,900. I think he's a very, very reasonable punt here in the 6K range. Finishing upside, possible submission upside. I think he just has all the DFS attributes you look for, and he's extremely cheap. So I'm going to say that Cerquera is a pretty good play this week, and Bakauskas, on the other hand, is a very fringy spend up here, and I probably won't have much of him. Next up, Nursultan Ruziboev versus Eric McConico, I believe is how you say it. UFC debut for McConico. I watched one fight of his. He looked well-rounded. He got a takedown, had some good top time. He just looked like a well-rounded guy. I can't really say much. I didn't do a ton of tape study. I haven't watched a ton of content, so I'm a little bit underprepared as far as this fight goes. But I think this should be Ruziboev early. He should have the upside to find a knockout. And if it goes late, I imagine that'll favor Eric a bit more. So not knowing a ton, I'm just going to lean into the metrics here for this fight a little bit. Ruziboev showing a really, really strong ITD line, really good round one metrics too. Ruziboev seems like an elite play here at 9,200. And then Eric, fringe metrics pretty much. You probably want to consider him for leverage against what I imagine will be a popular Ruziboev, but as a play, he's not a great play. Moving on to Nikolay versus Austin Vanderford. This fight just got added yesterday, and I think they have salary. Yeah, they did. So Vanderford 7,800 and Nikolay 8,400. Based on the line movement, you could say Vanderford might have a touch of line value, but I mean, not really. It's lined about correctly for the DraftKings prices. And from an upside perspective, Vanderford's the guy with all the takedown upside here. And at 7,800, I think that's okay. Just having that. So I'll put him as a fine play. Don't have the ITD lines yet. I imagine they'll be okay on both sides. Nikolay, pure striker. You're going to need him to finish at this price, I think, especially given we'll talk about a lot of good fighters around him in the salary range too. So Nikolay, another, I would say another fringy play here, and Vanderford's probably the better DFS side. Next up, Ricky Simone versus Javid Basharat. Javid Basharat, where fantasy points go to die. He's a narrow margins guy. He'll go in and out, try to jab you up, leg kicks. Very technical fighter, very good game planner. But Is he a good fantasy fighter? No. Um, I know we saw this one 99-point performance, but that was in a fight where he had takedown upside and stayed very busy with the total strike. So that's one thing I can give him credit as far as that goes. When he gets takedowns, he is staying busy, landing those pitter patter strikes, and it doesn't do much in terms of the actual fight. But for DFS purposes, that's pretty good. But the thing is, I don't imagine him having this takedown path in this fight because he's fighting Ricky Simone, who is pretty much a pure wrestler. This guy will shoot like 10, 15 times a fight. And his fights are pretty binary. If he can get takedowns, he'll win. If he can't get takedowns, he probably will lose. And I don't care. As long as he's a reasonable underdog, I'll play him. I mean, plus 211, give me that all day. It's kind of like NBA, right? Where you have like a 3K guy who makes it into the starting lineup. They might go 0 for 15, but you don't care because you have to make that play. I think it's a similar situation with Ricky Simone. 9 takedowns in the Son Yadong fight. Attempts, excuse me, 9 attempts, 13 attempts, 11 attempts. I mean, I know what he's going to do. So I don't really care if he wins or doesn't win, but for DFS, I know that he's an extremely good play. And Basharat, again, narrow margins fighter, mostly a striker, not a lot of finishing upside. I think he's a very fringy play. Next up, we have Abdul Malik versus Nick Klein. Abdul Malik, huge favorite, probably gets it done here early. Nick Klein, his path to victory, weather an early storm, get this guy tired, and look to find an opportunistic submission, back take, something like that. Very low percentage outcome, probably around 10%. So, I mean, the line is accurate, in my opinion. Maybe a bit overinflated this because we haven't seen Mansour later in a fight. We don't know what he looks like. He's relatively unproven, but he looks like a very strong prospect. I mean, the best round one line on the slate, the best finishing metrics on the slate, potential takedown upside. He's a good play, right? But the thing I'll say about him is this is just a complete pseudoscience, but I feel like every time when it's a $9,700 fighter and they actually have the metrics to justify it, they somehow go to a low striking decision like Bo Nickel. And every time it's the worst $9,700 play you've ever seen. Fatima Klein, killing Sal killed a couple weeks ago, first minute finish. Like, it's just, again, that's just more of a rant about how these high priced fighters tend to be unpredictable as far as DFS goes. But from a technical analysis, I have to say he's a good play, but it does worry me playing a guy like this at chalk who's going to need to finish early to get there. Nick Klein, very, very, very fringy play. Probably leave him in for MME, but besides that, no interest in him. Next up, Andre Fili, Milk, Costa. I like Mel Costa here. Pick him, fight, pick your side. I'll take Costa. I think that he has the grappling and submission upside. I think that he has the career trajectory upside. I think he's a younger fighter. I just think he's in a better spot here in his career than Andre Fili. Andre Fili, crafty vet. He's a proven fighter. He's won against a lot of good guys, but I just think this is a trajectory difference here, and I think Costa gets it done. Fili, I'm sure, will be popular. I'm sure I'll have him in my lineups as well, but just as a pick and as a lean, I do like Costa a bit better in this matchup. Moving on to Ibo Aslan, Yan Cutelaba. This fight should be a car crash. One guy gets finished. Cutelaba, unfortunately, he's been going to two decisions in his last 2 fights, which is very rare for him. He's known as this boomer bust guy without many decisions in his career, and it seems like he's been fighting a bit more conservative his last few fights, so that could definitely impact the DFS upside negatively. But I have to think that Ebo's going to bring the fight to him, and more likely than not, this fight probably does finish, even given Kutalaba's recent conservative style. So pretty great fight to target. I think you want to get to both sides of this thing. If it goes to a sloppy decision, you probably won't like it, but it's just something you have to accept. Next up, we have the main card: Alonzo Menifield, Julius Walker. Two light heavyweights. Julius Walker with the grappling upside. Both guys have finishing upside. I think this is a great fight to target. And there's not really much else to break down. I could give a pick. I mean, I don't know. Who knows? Light heavyweights, I guess. Menifield has more experience, but don't really care as far as the pick goes. I just think both sides are good from a DFS perspective. Next up, Gene Silva, Malik Bagdesaryan. Another interesting line here. I think that Gene Silva is very live to actually go to a decision here. He's fighting Malik, who's a pure high-level kickboxer himself. And Gene Silva, he's known to be this tenacious guy in the octagon, always looking for the finish. And he's been on quite the run. Beating Drew Dober is a very good look, especially on, I think, a week notice. But, wait, what? 66 points. Is that real? He only scored 66 in the Drew Dober fight? 45 plus. I guess so. Wow. That's shocking to me. Gene Silva, I think that normally he's a very good DFS target, but he's a little bit overpriced this week. And I think that he's much more live to win a decision than previous fights. And being that he's a pure striker, he will not score well in a decision. So I'll have him in my lineups, but definitely would rather get up to Abdul Malik or go down to Ruziboev if I'm up here in this 9K range. I guess, he's not the worst, though. Like, between Basharat and Bakauskas, I'd rather have Silva. So he's an okay play, I would say. Not my favorite, given the matchup. And Malik, he's just not winning that often. Pure kickboxer. Probably when condition is a decision, which might be good enough at 6.7K. So I think he's, again, a very fringy MME play. Moving on to Rob Font, Gene Matsumoto. This fight's probably a dud on both sides. Rob Font, pure boxer, pretty much. Gene Matsumoto, mostly a striker as well, but he can mix it up every now and then. I think that, this fight is probably just a pass overall. I won't X it out, but I don't imagine that it'll be popular, and I think that's for good reason. Next up, we have the co-main event: Brendan Allen, Anthony Hernandez. This is a very, very intriguing matchup. We have Anthony Hernandez, who is a tier 1 DFS fighter up there with Merab. His style it's elite for DFS. Just nonstop pace, nonstop pressure, takedowns, control, strikes, everything. And this week he's fighting Brendan Allen, who's a very high-level grappler and jiu-jitsu artist himself. Interesting matchup, but for Anthony Hernandez, he will do what he always does: come forward, shoot takedowns, look to control you, look to beat you up, land strikes, all that stuff. You're going to get the same Anthony Hernandez, I think. The question is what you'll get out of Brendan Allen. If I'm Brendan Allen game planning for this fight, I think I honestly try to defend the takedowns and keep it on the feet. I think that Brendan Allen actually is the better striker in this matchup, and that could be his path to victory. The other path he would have is opportunistic back takes, mounts. If he can win a scramble and end up in a dominant position, he could ride out the round, or potentially threaten a submission. So he does kind of have that opportunistic finishing ability, and I do think he could potentially win a 15-minute striking match, but that's hard to do. I mean, Anthony Hernandez, he won't let you have a striking match. He will shoot nonstop. So honestly, Brendan Allen, win conditions are very, very small here. The line's probably accurate. I mean, what is it, like 25%? Yeah, that's probably about right. Maybe even a bit too narrow, to be honest. Allen, I'm going to respect just because Hernandez will be very popular. So I will play some Allen, but Hernandez, I'll have a lot of him for good reason. One of the best DFS fighters in the UFC right now. And I'm interested to see what happens next. If he wins this fight, he'll be right in that title picture. So great fight there. Last but not least, Henry Cejudo, Yadong. Henry Cejudo, 38 years old, wrestler that probably strikes too much for his own good. You would think with the Olympic wrestling background that he has, he would be all in on the wrestling and have a really good system. He hasn't really done that. He hasn't adapted his wrestling game for MMA really at all. Not the best control, no submission danger at all. And I just think this is probably another trajectory fight where Yadong San's the younger guy, he's the faster guy, more in his prime. Henry Cejudo on the way out, not the same guy that was double champ. Could Cejudo make this competitive? Yeah, absolutely. He's an elite fighter, but I think ultimately Yadong gets it done. From a DFS perspective, Cejudo is a good play just because he's going to need takedowns to win. I think that's fairly obvious. So at 7,300, 5 rounds to work with, takedown win condition, very, very strong play. Yadong, it's a bit tricky. I remember his last fight. Was it the Chris Gutierrez fight? Let me check. No, it was the Yan fight. So that Yan fight, I think we were pretty low on that one. And then the Gutierrez fight, that was one of the main events where I actually said it was very, very fadeable. And it was looking good for about 3.5 rounds. And then Yadong started implementing some takedowns, got a ton of total strikes and control. And that's what really helped him get there. But for a while, that was looking very, very sketchy. Still only scored 107. I think that Yadong, if there's a fighter out of this fight to not be on the optimal, it's him, 100%. Like, if he doesn't finish, and I don't think he'll be getting takedowns in this fight against Henry Cejudo. So Yadong, I think, is very, very reasonable to fade. He'll probably come in over-owned. He'll probably come in like 40%. I don't agree with that. I imagine I'll be under on him. I will not have 100% of the main event this week. And that'll be one of the stands I take to get a bit more unique on this slate. That's going to do it. Thank you guys for watching. As always, let's add this fight, Cejudo, and we'll say Yadong is a fine play. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Best of luck, everyone.